Have you ever wondered what real power is? Is it the ability to command an army? To sign a death warrant with a flick of the wrist? Or is it something quieter, something that can't be held in a hand or aimed like a weapon? We often think of revenge as a sharp, sudden act, a ledger being balanced in a moment of dramatic confrontation. But some of the most profound acts of defiance are not explosions. They are painstakingly built, piece by piece, in the quiet moments when no one is watching. They are legacies forged not in fire, but in ink. Welcome to Revenge Pains. I'm Serena, and tonight we have a story that challenges the very definition of retribution. It's a story from a time of earth-shattering upheaval, the Russian Revolution, a time when ideologies were clashing with the force of tempests, and human lives were the currency of change. Our story is about a man who stood in the heart of that storm, an artist named Lev Volkov, who was caught between two brutal certainties, the Red Terror and the White Terror. He was faced with a choice that all of us in our own smaller ways must confront. When faced with monstrous acts, do we become monsters ourselves to fight back, or do we find another way? Lev's journey is one of immense courage, but his weapon of choice wasn't a rifle or a bomb. It was a sketchbook, and his revenge wasn't about ending a life, but about making thousands of them immortal. This is the story of the Book of Echoes. Our journey begins in the autumn of 1919. A ramshackle farmhouse squats amidst the golden Ukrainian plains, its crooked spine braced against the winds sweeping down from the Dnieper River. This is the improbable headquarters of the Black Sun anarchist collective, a tiny, defiant bubble of utopia in a world tearing itself apart. Inside, the air is a thick, heady cocktail of printing ink, cheap, pungent tobacco, and the bitter aroma of chicory coffee brewing on a sputtering stove. This is Lev Volkov's cathedral. At 30, he is leaner than he should be, with a tangle of dark hair that perpetually falls across his brow and eyes that seem to absorb the world with an intense, consuming focus. His element is not the battlefield, but this cluttered room, where the rhythmic clatter of a small printing press provides a constant, mechanical heartbeat for their unlikely dream. He's working now, a piece of charcoal dancing across a sheet of rough paper. His fingers, permanently smudged with black, move with a startling combination of speed and tenderness, capturing the likeness of a fellow comrade, a young man with a fierce jaw and eyes full of unshakable belief. These portraits are destined for a new pamphlet, a celebration of the free territories of Makhnovia, their anarchist haven. The atmosphere is one of ragged, defiant optimism. They have no state, no masters. Every decision is debated, every meal is shared. Here, for a fragile moment, they are living the future they are fighting for. A shadow falls across his sketchbook. A pretty picture won't stop a bullet, Lev. He looks up into the face of Anya. She is all sharp angles and burning intensity, her hands stained not with ink, but with the dark, slick grease of a machine gun she has just finished cleaning. Her gaze is fixed on his drawing, not with disdain, but with a profound, weary impatience. Lev allows a small smile to touch his lips, though it doesn't quite reach his eyes. Perhaps not, but it might remind the man holding the gun what he is fighting for, or against. He holds up the portrait. Look at Dmitri. In this drawing, he is not just a soldier. He is a farmer, a poet. He is the future we speak of. That is a kind of power, Anya. It's a luxury, she counters, her voice low and firm. She gestures towards the window. Beyond the fields of dying sunflowers, a faint, dark smudge stains the horizon. The smoke from a distant village, a grim punctuation mark on the landscape. That is reality. Down there, Morozov's whites are torturing peasants for information. To the north, Trotsky's reds are requisitioning grain from farmers who have nothing left. And we are here, debating the symbolic power of charcoal. Their debate is an old one, a constant, circling argument that lies at the heart of their collective. Is the pen truly mightier than the sword? Can a world built on freedom be defended with the tools of violence? Anya, who has seen her family's farm burned twice by two different armies, believes in the cold, hard logic of survival. Lev, who has seen how easily ideals can curdle into dogma, clings to the power of art to preserve humanity. He turns from the smoke, his gaze settling back on the faces of his comrades in the room, the fierce hope etched into their features. His world is this room, his art, his ideals. He believes, he has to believe, that what they are creating here is more powerful than what is being destroyed out there. But the tremors of the war are drawing closer with every passing day. The smoke on the horizon is a promise and a threat. It's the smell of a world burning, and Lev can't escape the chilling premonition that sooner or later, the flames will reach their door. He dips his charcoal, his hand moving with renewed urgency. He draws faster, as if he can somehow outpace the approaching darkness, capturing the light in his friend's eyes before it is extinguished forever. The fragile bubble of their utopia feels thinner than ever, stretched taut over a landscape of unimaginable suffering, and the air itself seems to whisper that it is only a matter of time before it bursts. The bursting of that bubble was never a question of if, but when. It came not with the roar of an army, but with the stumbling, frantic arrival of a single man. He was a specter of mud and terror, his chest heaving with ragged, desperate breaths as he collapsed through the farmhouse door. His eyes were wide with a horror that words could not yet contain, and a dark, telltale smear on his sleeve spoke of a close, terrible acquaintance with violence. Blood, not his own. Panicked words tumbled from his lips, fragmented and choked with exhaustion, painting a picture of absolute horror. A nearby Jewish shtetl, a small, peaceful community named Tikva, had been overrun, not by the Reds but by the Whites, by Colonel Ivan Morozov's Cossacks. The fragile optimism of the commune evaporated in an instant, replaced by a cold, metallic dread. Anya was the first to move, her previous debate with Lev now a moot point, a forgotten luxury. She was already grabbing a rifle, her face a mask of grim determination. There was no discussion, no vote. This was a violation that required an immediate, visceral response. Lev, his charcoal still clutched in his hand, found himself swept up in the urgent, chaotic tide. A small band of armed anarchists, their faces pale but resolute, assembled in minutes. He grabbed a satchel with his sketchbook, a reflex, an instinct he couldn't suppress, and joined them as they raced towards Tikva. They moved across the autumn fields under a sky the color of old pewter. The usual sounds of the countryside were gone, replaced by an unnerving, profound silence. There was no birdsong, no distant call of a farmer. It was a dead quiet, the kind of stillness that follows a monstrous event. And then the smell hit them. The acrid stench of burnt wood and something else, something sickeningly sweet and primal that churned the stomach. They were too late. Of course they were too late. Tikva was not a battlefield. It was a wound. A grotesque open wound carved into the earth. Homes that had stood for generations were now hollowed out, blackened shells, their contents spilling into the muddy streets like entrails. Looted furniture, shattered pottery, and torn scraps of clothing lay tangled with the everyday objects of life, creating a surreal landscape of violation. The silence they had felt from afar was even more profound here. It was a silence born of absence, a stillness punctuated only by the low, keening weep of the few survivors who wandered through the ruins like ghosts in their own lives. Lev felt a dislocation, a sense of falling out of his own body. His mind, trained to observe and capture detail, was now a curse, forcing him to see everything with an unbearable clarity. He wandered away from the others, drawn towards the synagogue. Its doors were splintered, hanging from a single hinge. Inside was a scene of calculated desecration. Holy books were torn apart, their pages scattered across the floor like fallen leaves, the sacred Hebrew script trampled into the mud. The ark, where the Torah scrolls had been kept, was smashed open, empty. He saw the small details that screamed louder than any cry. A child's small wooden doll, its painted face cheerful and bright, lying in the dirt next to a discarded Cossack saber, its curved blade dark and brutish. A single shoe, a woman's shoe, sitting upright in a puddle as if its owner had simply vanished into the air. This was not the abstract political violence they debated in the farmhouse. This wasn't class conflict or revolutionary struggle. This was intimate, hateful butchery, a poison directed not at an idea, but at a people. His sketchbook, tucked into his satchel, felt like a useless, insulting object. What was the point of a drawing in the face of this? What could a charcoal line possibly say about such a bottomless void of cruelty? He felt a wave of shame for his own artistic impulse, for his naive belief that he could capture truth with a piece of burnt wood. He was about to turn away, to flee back to the relative sanity of the farm, when a hand, thin and surprisingly strong, grabbed his arm. He looked down into the face of an old woman. Her hair was a wild halo of white, her face a mask of such profound grief that it seemed to be carved from ancient stone. Tears tracked clean lines through the soot on her cheeks. Her eyes, however, were not empty. They burned with a fierce, desperate light. She pointed a trembling finger, not at the destruction, but at his satchel, at his sketchbook. "You," she rasped, her voice a dry, crackling whisper. "You are the artist from the commune, yes?" Lev could only nod, his throat tight with unspeakable emotion. "Then draw," she commanded, her grip tightening on his arm. Her voice rose, gaining a terrible, prophetic strength. "Draw it all. Draw the faces of my grandchildren. Draw the house of my neighbor still burning. Draw the pages from our books. Don't let them forget us. Don't let them turn us into smoke and whispers. Make it real. Make it permanent." In that instant, something inside Lev shifted. The shame he felt was burned away by the raw fire of her plea. He finally understood. The purpose of his art wasn't to celebrate an imagined future, but to bear witness to the unbearable present. It wasn't propaganda. It was testimony. Forgetting was the final, ultimate violence, and his art could be a shield against that oblivion. His hand went to his satchel, his fingers closing around a stick of charcoal. He pulled out the sketchbook. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, clarifying fury that settled deep in his bones. He looked at the old woman, at the lines of sorrow and strength etched around her eyes, and he began to draw. He sketched with a frantic, desperate energy, his charcoal strokes no longer tender, but sharp, angry, and incisive. He drew the ruins, the scattered pages, the doll in the mud. He moved through the shtetl, finding other survivors. He asked their permission with his eyes, and they would nod, their faces numb with shock. He sketched the face of a young boy with ancient, haunted eyes, huddled in a doorway. He sketched an old man sitting on the rubble of his own home, staring at nothing. He did not shy away from the dead. He drew them with a reverence and precision that was both an act of remembrance and an indictment. Each face was a story, each line a silent scream against the injustice that had befallen them. This was not for a pamphlet. This was not for the revolution. This was for the woman who had grabbed his arm. This was for the boy in the doorway. This was for the dead, so that they would not be forgotten. As the gray sky began to darken, and Anya and the others began the somber work of burying the victims, Lev continued to draw, page after page. He didn't know it yet, not fully, but he had just written the first, terrible entry in what would become his life's work. The first chapter of the Book of Echoes. Now I have to pause here for a moment, because what Lev is doing is something extraordinary. It's so easy, when you witness an atrocity, to be consumed by one of two impulses, rage or despair. The desire to lash out, to seek immediate, violent retribution, or the desire to just shut down, to turn away because the horror is too much to bear. Lev is choosing a third path. He's converting his horror and his rage not into violence, but into an act of creation. That old woman's plea, "Don't let them forget us," it transformed him. He's no longer just an artist for a cause, he's become a vessel for memory itself. And in a war where history is being written by the victors in real time, where truth is twisted to fit ideology, this quiet act of drawing a face, of recording a truth, is one of the most radical acts of rebellion imaginable. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most potent form of revenge isn't about making your enemy pay, but about ensuring that their victims' stories outlive them. Weeks bled into one another, each day a new exercise in uncertainty. The specter of Morozov's Cossacks haunted the region, their sporadic, brutal raids a constant, low-grade terror. The Black Sun Commune existed on a knife's edge, their patrols more frequent, their debates more strained. The memory of Tikva had left an indelible scar. Then, the winds of war shifted. The Red Army, a vast and relentless tide, swept down from the north, and Morozov's white forces, overextended and poorly supplied, were driven back, melting away into the vastness of the Ukrainian steppe. A brief, cautious sigh of relief rippled through the anarchist territories. It was a shallow relief, tinged with suspicion, but it was relief nonetheless. The immediate threat was gone. The liberators had arrived. They were led by Commissar Dmitry Orlov. He arrived not on a white horse, but in a dusty, armored car, a man who seemed to have been carved from the same gray winter sky that hung over them. His eyes were the color of frozen river water, and his face was a study in impassive certainty. He established his Cheka headquarters, the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution and Sabotage, in the local town hall, the red flag now hanging where the double-headed eagle of the Tsar once was. The symbol had changed, but the imposing stone building radiated the same chilling authority. Orlov addressed the locals in the main square. His voice was flat, devoid of passion, yet each word landed with the weight of an unshakable decree. He spoke of justice, of liberation for the proletariat, of the end of tyranny. He promised a new world, but the language he used was one of dogma and iron will, not of freedom. Lev, accompanied by Anya and a small delegation from the Black Sun Commune, sought a meeting. They came not as supplicants, but as fellow revolutionaries, allies in the fight against the Whites. Their purpose was to report the details of the pogrom at Tikva, to offer their eyewitness accounts so that Morozov's crimes could be formally documented, his butchery exposed to the world. They were granted an audience in the town hall's main chamber. Orlov sat behind a large oak desk, flanked by two stern-faced guards. He listened to Lev's carefully worded, emotional account with a patience that felt more like clinical observation than empathy. Lev laid out his sketches on the desk, the faces of the survivors, the desecrated synagogue, the child's doll. He poured the horror of that day onto the polished wood. When he finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Orlov stared at the drawings for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up, his cold eyes meeting Lev's. "A regrettable incident," Orlov stated flatly, his voice unchanged. "But it is a secondary consequence of a larger class conflict. The Cossacks are a tool of the landowning bourgeois. Their peasant superstitions and pogroms are a symptom of a dying world." He made a small, dismissive gesture with his hand, a wave that seemed to erase the entire tragedy. "Our priority now is the consolidation of Soviet power. That means securing the grain supply for the cities and the army. That is the engine of the revolution." Lev was stunned into silence. Secondary consequence? Anya stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "We are not talking about a symptom, Commissar. We are talking about murdered children. We are offering you evidence." "I have all the evidence I need," Orlov cut her off, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "The primary counter-revolutionary threat in this region is not the scattered remnants of the White Guards, but the kulak sympathizers who hoard grain and undermine the authority of the people's state." The meeting was over. They were dismissed. As they walked out of the town hall, the cold air felt like a slap in the face. Lev felt a sickening, hollow dread coiling in his stomach. He had come to a liberator seeking justice and had been handed a doctrinal textbook instead. The very next day, Orlov's words took on a brutal, physical form. The Cheka began its grain requisitioning with merciless efficiency. They went from farm to farm, seizing what little the peasants had managed to keep hidden from the Whites. Resistance was met with immediate, unhesitating force. Lev and his comrades learned that several local farmers they knew, men who had shared food with the commune, had been arrested. They were accused of being kulak sympathizers and hoarders. Later that afternoon, a crowd was gathered, or rather forced to gather, in the same town square where Orlov had spoken of liberation. The accused peasants, 6 of them, were paraded before the townsfolk. A Cheka officer read from a piece of paper, a summary of their crimes against the revolution. There was no trial, no defense. From the edge of the crowd, Lev watched, his heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He saw the faces of the condemned men. He saw the same terror, the same bewildered disbelief that he had seen in the eyes of the survivors of Tikva. It was the same look of humanity being crushed under the heel of an unyielding, absolute power. A volley of shots echoed through the square. It was quick, efficient, and brutally final. Revolutionary justice, as swift and as merciless as a Cossack's saber. Lev turned away, his stomach heaving. He stumbled down a side alley, leaning against a cold brick wall, the sketches in his satchel suddenly feeling heavy, incomplete. He had captured the victims of the White Terror. Now, standing in the shadow of the red flag, he realized with a sickening, soul-crushing clarity that he had to start a new collection. This new power was just the old tyranny painted a different color. The face of the oppressor had changed, but the boot on the neck felt exactly the same. The antagonist wasn't a single man like Morozov or a single army. It was the idea behind them both. It was the unyielding certainty of the ideologue, the monstrous belief that power grants a monopoly on truth and morality. And their small, fragile commune was trapped squarely in the middle, a tiny island of doubt in an ocean of dogma. He made his way back to the farmhouse. The image of the executed peasants burned into his mind. The scent of printing ink and chicory coffee no longer felt like hope. It felt like a delusion. When he arrived, he found Anya in the barn. She wasn't cleaning a machine gun. She was carefully, secretly, unpacking a small wooden crate filled with blocks of TNT. Her face, illuminated by a single lantern, was set in a hard, resolute mask. Her belief in peaceful means, in the power of debate and ideals, had been shattered in the town square. She had found her own answer to Orlov's dogma, and it was one that spoke a language of explosive, undeniable force. The cycle of violence was not just continuing, it was escalating, and it was threatening to consume them all. This brings us to the heart of our story, the turning point. It wasn't a battle or a public event. It was a silent, profound decision made in the damp, musty confines of a root cellar. This hidden space beneath the farmhouse floorboards had become Lev's secret studio, the only place he felt safe enough to continue his work. The air was thick with the smell of earth and potatoes, a strange, grounding scent in a world that had lost all sense of stability. By the flickering, anemic light of a single candle, Lev laid out his work. The pages of his sketchbook were no longer bound together. They were individual sheets, a growing, terrible collection of ghosts. On one side of the dirt floor, he placed the faces from Tikva, the old woman who had begged him to remember, her eyes blazing with grief. The young boy, his expression ancient and hollow. The torn pages of the Torah, the Hebrew letters like silent, accusing witnesses. These were the victims of Colonel Morozov's hateful, traditionalist tyranny, the victims of the White Terror. On the other side, he arranged his newer sketches. The 6 peasants, their faces a mixture of confusion and terror, moments before the Cheka's firing squad had delivered its revolutionary justice. He had sought out their families, listened to their stories, and drawn them not as Kulak sympathizers, but as fathers, husbands, and sons. He drew the wife of one of the men, her face completely numb as she stared at the empty chair at her dinner table. These were the victims of Commissar Orlov's cold, ideological zealotry, the victims of the Red Terror. He sat there in the quiet dark and looked from one set of drawings to the other, and he saw the same thing staring back at him from every page. It wasn't a political affiliation. It wasn't an ideology. It was the same raw human suffering, the same fear, the same grief, the same bewildered question in their eyes. Why? From the shtetl to the town square, the color of the flag under which they perished was irrelevant. The machinery of fanaticism, whether in the name of God and the Tsar or the proletariat and the state, produced the exact same result: a pile of broken bodies and shattered lives. The 2 sets of drawings blurred together, becoming a single choir of silent screams. A floorboard creaked above him. He heard hushed, urgent voices, Anya, and 2 other senior members of the commune, Mikkel and Alina. He froze, extinguishing his candle, and listened. They were planning. Their voices were tight with a feverish, desperate energy. They spoke of the grain shipments, of Orlov's routine, of the exact moment his armored car passed the old stone bridge on its way to the regional headquarters. They spoke of TNT and detonators. They were planning to assassinate Commissar Orlov. In their minds, it was a necessary act, a decisive blow to reassert their autonomy, to show the Bolsheviks that the anarchists were not a force to be dismissed or absorbed. It was an act of survival, of revolutionary defiance. To Lev, listening in the darkness, it sounded like a death sentence. Not just for them, if they were caught, but for the very soul of their movement. He waited until the others had dispersed, then he pushed aside the trapdoor and confronted Anya in the main room of the farmhouse. The printing press was silent. The whole house was silent. "I heard you," he said, his voice quiet but shaking with an intensity that surprised even himself. "I heard the plan." Anya didn't feign ignorance. She stood her ground, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of defiance and sorrow. "It has to be done, Lev. He's a cancer. He's strangling us, turning the peasants against us. An eye for an eye. And then what, Anya? He pleaded, his voice rising. What happens after? The Cheka sends another commissar, this one even more ruthless. They'll use your act as an excuse to liquidate every anarchist commune from here to the Black Sea. They will call us terrorists, and they will be right. We can't build a new world with their old tools. To become killers is to become them. It's to surrender. It's not surrender, it's fighting back, she shot back, her voice cracking. What is your alternative, Lev? To draw, to hide in the cellar and sketch the faces of the dead while the living are being destroyed. Your book of ghosts won't save us. No, he said, his own voice dropping to a whisper. It won't save us, but it might save our humanity. It might be the only thing left when all of this is over. The chasm between them was absolute. She saw his refusal to take up arms as a weakness, a betrayal of their comrades. He saw her path as a spiritual suicide, a descent into the same moral abyss occupied by their oppressors. You're a coward, Lev, she said, the words falling like stones in the silence. It wasn't said with anger, but with a deep, cutting disappointment. You are hiding behind your art. She turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the center of the room. Her words struck him, but they did not break him. In that moment of profound heartbreak and isolation, his resolve hardened into something unbreakable. He would not join them. His revenge, because it was a form of revenge, he saw that now, would not be measured in blood or bodies. It wouldn't be a single, explosive act. It would be a slow, patient, and enduring act of creation. He descended back into the root cellar. He looked at the scattered faces on the floor, the victims of red and white alike. He would not choose a side. He would choose all of them. He would stand for the victims, for every last one of them. He found a stack of blank paper, a commodity more precious than gold that he had been saving. He took a fresh stick of charcoal and wrote a title on the top sheet. He called it The Book of Echoes. It was no longer just a collection of sketches. It was a formal project, a conscious mission. He would create a chronicle of all the revolution's victims, a testament to the human cost of ideological certainty. He would not be a passive witness, reacting to horror. He would become an active historian, a keeper of the memories that both sides were so desperate to erase. His focus shifted. He began to systematically seek out survivors, to collect testimonies. He would travel at night, a ghost moving between villages, using the commune's network of sympathizers not for revolutionary action, but for historical preservation. He would sit in darkened kitchens, his sketchbook open on his lap, and listen. He would listen to the stories of mothers whose sons were conscripted by the whites and never returned. He would listen to tales of fathers arrested by the Reds for telling the wrong political joke. He listened to stories of hunger, of fear, of small acts of kindness in the face of unimaginable cruelty. He drew faces, but he also drew objects. A worn-out pair of shoes, a child's toy, a letter that had never been sent. He wrote down fragments of conversation, songs, prayers. His art was no longer propaganda. It had become a weapon of memory. His singular mission was to build an alternative history, a truth so complete, so human, and so devastatingly sad that it would shame the simplistic, violent narratives of both the Red Army and the White. He was creating a legacy, not of righteous violence, but of radical empathy. His revenge would be to make sure that no one was forgotten. Lev's new obsession was a dangerous one. In a world of black and white, his insistence on documenting the shades of gray made him an enemy to everyone. He became a ghost, a whisper in the villages. He traveled under the cover of darkness, his satchel of sketches and notes now a heavier burden than any rifle. But his work was taking on a life of its own. It was no longer just a collection of sad drawings. It was becoming a vast, sprawling indictment of the entire war. The whispers about him eventually reached the ears of Commissar Orlov. Orlov's network of informants, spread thin but effective, began to report on a shadowy figure who was spreading what they called seditious lies. A man who was not agitating for open rebellion, but doing something they considered far more insidious. He was collecting stories. He was documenting the Cheka's executions, the famines caused by grain requisitioning, the grief of the families. He was creating an anti-Soviet narrative, a people's history of suffering that directly contradicted the official tale of glorious revolution. Orlov, a man who understood that history is a weapon, saw Lev's work as a direct threat to the state's control over the past, and therefore its control over the future. He began to actively hunt for this anarchist chronicler. At the same time, on the other side of the shifting front lines, Colonel Morozov was hearing similar whispers. His men had captured a young anarchist courier. Under the threat of brutal consequences, the terrified boy, hoping to earn leniency, revealed the existence of an artist, a man from the Black Sun commune, who was documenting the White Army's atrocities. He spoke of sketches of the pogrom at Tikva. Morozov, who was courting support from potential foreign allies in France and Britain, was enraged. An undeniable visual record of his brutal methods could be catastrophic, undermining his carefully crafted image as a Christian liberator saving Russia from godless Bolsheviks. Suddenly, Lev Volkov was not just an obscure artist, he was a target. Morozov also wanted him silenced. The vice was tightening from both sides. Lev was no longer just a memory keeper, he was a fugitive, hunted by the two most powerful forces in the region. He moved constantly, from one sympathetic farmer's barn to another, never staying more than a single night. He slept in haylofts and root cellars, the smell of damp earth and his own fear becoming his constant companions. One night, the Cheka came closer than ever before. Acting on a tip, they raided a barn where he had been hiding just hours earlier. He had been warned away at the last minute by a farmer's son who had spotted the approaching armored car. Lev watched from a distant tree line as the soldiers stormed the barn. He saw the flicker of light inside, and then a plume of smoke. They had found the small bundle of notes he had been forced to leave behind. He watched as a portion of his work, weeks of dangerous travel and countless stories, turned to ash. The sight filled him not with despair, but with a cold, clarifying rage. It made him more determined. They could burn the pages, but they couldn't burn the memories. He would just have to work faster. The stakes were raised catastrophically when Anya's desperate plan reached its inevitable, tragic conclusion. The assassination attempt on Orlov failed. Her group had been infiltrated by a Cheka informant. They were ambushed at the stone bridge before they could even plant the explosives. Mikhail and Alina were taken down in the ensuing chaos, their fight ending in a brief, brutal exchange in the pre-dawn light. But Anya was captured alive. When Orlov learned who she was, a key figure in the Black Sun commune, he realized her value. An execution would be too simple, too clean. He saw an opportunity. He had her transported to the Cheka headquarters in the city, where he paraded her as a counter-revolutionary terrorist. He orchestrated a public show trial, a piece of political theater designed to denounce all anarchists as violent criminals and enemies of the people. Anya, defiant and unbroken, refused to cooperate, her silence and her glares more articulate than any forced confession. Orlov's propaganda machine, however, didn't need her cooperation. He used her capture to intensify his hunt for the one he now saw as the intellectual poison behind the movement, the true source of the anarchist defiance. He put a name to the ghostly chronicler, Lev Volkov. Lev's name and a crude sketch of his face were now on posters pasted in every town square. The whispers had become a manhunt. Orlov knew that Anya was connected to Lev, and he was convinced that Lev would eventually make a mistake, perhaps try to rescue her. He was using Anya as bait. Lev was now trapped, his mission more crucial than ever, and his time rapidly running out. He had to finish the book, and its most important chapter, the story of Anya, was a story whose ending was being written by his most ruthless enemy. Have you ever been at a point where everything seems lost? Where the walls are closing in, all exits are sealed, and the weight of your own choices becomes an unbearable load? That's where Lev found himself. He was a rat in a maze designed by two different architects of cruelty, and his own moral compass, his belief in the inherent power of truth, felt like a fatal flaw, a point of weakness in a world that only respected the gun. He eventually made his way to Odessa, the great port city on the Black Sea. It was a city teeming with desperation, a chaotic purgatory crowded with refugees, spies, profiteers, and broken armies. Red flags flew from the grand old buildings, but the city's soul was paranoid and gray. Every face in the crowd was a potential informant, every shadow a potential threat. Lev was at his lowest point. He was ragged, hungry, and haunted by the face of Anya, imprisoned and awaiting her fate. He believed his project was doomed. What was the point of this book, this massive, secret ledger of sorrow, if it was just going to be discovered and burned, and he would be put against a wall, another forgotten name on an endless list? His days were spent in the grimy, chaotic world of the docks, seeking passage on any ship leaving the country. But leaving required papers, money, and connections, all of which he lacked. He was just another ghost in a city full of them. It was during this desperate search that he made a connection that would change everything. He fell into conversation with a railway engineer, a man named Sergei. Sergei was a man whose cynicism was a hard, protective shell around a core of surprising kindness. He was burly, with hands permanently stained with cold dust and a weary, cenotol look in his eyes. "Red, white, the trains still have to run," Sergei told him one evening, sharing a piece of hard bread and a bottle of cheap, potent samogon. "I don't care about their flags. I care about the steam pressure. I care about getting from point A to point B. Everyone has a point B they're desperate to get to these days." Lev, sensing a flicker of something other than fanaticism in the man, slowly, cautiously, began to tell him not about his political affiliations, but about his project. He spoke of the sketches, of the need to get these stories out of the country, to show the world the real face of the war. Sergei, who had seen his share of bodies loaded onto freight cars under every color of flag, listened intently. He had no interest in anarchist philosophy, but the idea of telling the truth, the whole, messy, human truth, resonated with his own pragmatic soul. "You're trying to smuggle history," the engineer said with a wry smile, understanding the scale of Lev's ambition. He took a long swallow from the bottle, his eyes thoughtful. "That's more dangerous than smuggling jewels, but I might know someone." He told Lev about a small, secret circle of foreigners who remained in the city. Red Cross officials and a handful of journalists who were trying to document the unfolding humanitarian crisis. They operated quietly, trying to remain neutral, but they were desperate for verifiable, on-the-ground accounts that weren't filtered through Bolshevik or white propaganda. "There is a French woman," Sergei said, his voice dropping lower. "A journalist, Isabelle Dubois. She's not like the others who just write down what the commissar tells them. She's brave, stubborn. She asks too many questions. They say she has integrity. The Cheka is watching her and she is scheduled to be evacuated on a French vessel in a few days. I can get you a message, maybe even arrange a meeting. She's looking for the truth. It sounds to me like you have a book full of it." It was a lightning bolt in the suffocating darkness of Lev's despair. A viable path, a way to succeed. All this time, he had been focused on the creation of the book, on the assembling of testimonies. He had never dared to think about what would happen next. Now, suddenly, he had a destination, a delivery point. The Book of Echoes wasn't destined to be burned in a barn or buried with him in a ditch. It could reach the outside world. It could be read. The voices of the dead could finally be heard. His mission snapped into sharp, final focus. It was no longer just about creation. It was about delivery. But the book was not yet complete. It was missing its most important chapter. It was missing the story of Anya, the revolutionary consumed by the very violence she had sought to master. He had to tell her story, her true story, not the one Orlov was crafting for his show trial. And a new, audacious, impossibly dangerous plan began to form in his mind. He had to get her final words. He had to get them from the one place in Odessa more dangerous than any other, the Cheka headquarters itself. The final piece of his masterpiece of memory was waiting for him in the heart of the monster's lair. The climax of Lev's war was not destined to be fought with guns, but with information. It was an act of intellectual warfare, a gambit of breathtaking audacity played out on a chessboard of chaos. He knew, through the same nervous whispers and back-alley information networks that had kept him alive, that Commissar Orlov was growing impatient. The propaganda value of Anya's show trial was diminishing. He planned to move her, to transport her from the city's Cheka headquarters to a more secure, permanent prison further inland, away from the prying eyes of foreign observers like Isabelle. Lev also knew, from Sergei's railway contacts, that Colonel Morozov's scouts, emboldened by the Red Army's focus on internal consolidation, were once again probing the city's defenses, looking for weaknesses. Two wolves circling the same prize. Lev's goal was not to have them destroy each other. That would be Anya's way. His goal was simpler and far more complex. He needed to create a window, a moment of pure, unadulterated chaos. He found a sympathetic telegraph operator, a young man whose brother had been one of the peasants executed for hoarding grain. The man's grief was quiet but profound, a cold ember of hatred for Orlov's regime. He agreed to help. Lev crafted 2 anonymous messages, 2 pieces of conflicting, tantalizing intelligence. The first was sent through a channel known to be monitored by Morozov's whites. It was a cryptic tip about a valuable Bolshevik asset being moved through the city's western outskirts, an asset connected to the suppression of anarchist movements. He made the asset sound like a high-ranking official or a shipment of gold, something irresistible to the opportunistic Cossack leader. The second message was sent to Orlov's Cheka dispatch. It was a warning, supposedly from a loyalist informant, of a white army infiltration team that had been spotted massing along the very same route. He described them as a reconnaissance in force, a major probe of the city's defenses. He was lighting 2 fuses, hoping they would meet at the perfect time. It was a gamble of insane proportions. If the timing was wrong, if either side failed to take the bait, he would have accomplished nothing. But if it worked, the city's military and security forces would be drawn away from the center, converging on a phantom conflict of his own creation. On the night of the planned transport, a thick, damp fog rolled in from the Black Sea, blanketing Odessa in a ghostly shroud. It was a gift from the heavens. The sounds of the city were muffled, the streetlights halos of fuzzy, indistinct light. Lev waited, his nerves stretched to the breaking point. Then he heard it. A distant, sporadic crackle of rifle fire from the western edge of the city. It was followed by the heavier, rhythmic thud of a machine gun. The bait had been taken. He could picture the scene. Orlov's convoy, moving cautiously through the fog, suddenly ambushed by Morozov's scouts, who were themselves expecting to find a weakly defended treasure, not an armed escort. Confusion would reign. Orlov, believing a major assault was underway, would divert reinforcements from the city center. Morozov, meeting unexpected resistance, would believe he had stumbled into a trap and likely do the same. It was a beautiful, terrible symphony of paranoia. As the sounds of the skirmish grew, Lev slipped through the back streets, a shadow in the fog. He moved towards the Cheka headquarters, the imposing stone building that had haunted his nightmares. As he'd hoped, the usual contingent of guards was depleted. Most had been sent as reinforcements to the manufactured crisis on the outskirts. The building was now a shell, its vital organs left momentarily unguarded. He didn't go for the armory or the holding cells. He went straight for the records office. It was a dusty, neglected room filled with filing cabinets, a bureaucratic monument to the regime's obsession with control. He moved quickly, his senses on fire. He was looking for one file, Anya's. He found it under A for anarchist. The file was thin. Inside was the official report, the lies, the fabricated connections to foreign powers. And there was the confession, the one Orlov planned to use for his propaganda. It was neatly typed, awaiting a signature she would never give. But tucked in the back, almost as an afterthought, was another document. It was a piece of cheap, scrap paper, covered in a frantic, scrawled handwriting. He recognized it as the script of a junior guard, a boy from his own village he had sketched once, a boy with kind eyes who had seemed out of place in the Cheka uniform. The guard had transcribed Anya's final, defiant, unredacted statement, a statement she had given when her interrogators had given up for the night, a statement of pure, unadulterated principle. Lev didn't touch the official confession. He didn't try to destroy the file. He took only the one thing that mattered. He took the truth. He took Anya's real last words. He slipped out of the building and back into the forgiving fog, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The skirmish was already dying down, both sides retreating in confusion, leaving them with casualties and nothing to show for it. Orlov would be furious, Morozov baffled. Their world of brute force had been undone by a whisper, a phantom. Lev fled through the labyrinthine streets, not back to a safe house, but towards the misty, foreboding docks. The final act was at hand. Under the pale, ghostly light of a dockyard lamp, he met Isabelle, the French journalist. Sergei had made the arrangements. She was a tall woman with intelligent, weary eyes that had seen too much. He didn't say much. He handed her the heavy, wrapped manuscript of the Book of Echoes. It was thick with pages, heavy with the weight of hundreds of lives. Tucked inside the cover was the small, scrap piece of paper containing Anya's final words, its most precious and hard-won page. "This is the truth," he said, his voice raspy. "This is the truth they are both trying to kill. The names, the faces, all of them." Isabel took the heavy bundle, her eyes scanning his face. She could see the immense cost of its creation etched into the lines around his eyes. "Are you coming with me?" she asked, her voice gentle. Lev looked out at the dark, shifting water at the silhouette of the French ship that would carry his book to safety. He thought of the faces in its pages. He thought of Anya. He had saved her legacy, if not her life. A profound sense of peace, one he had not felt in years, settled over him. He shook his head. "No, my work is here. There are still so many stories to tell." His revenge was complete. It wasn't the death of his enemies. It was something far more lasting. It was the immortalization of their victims, the preservation of a complex, human truth that utterly indicted their entire worldview. He had not taken a life. He had saved thousands from the oblivion of a victor's history. He watched as Isabel was rowed out to the ship. He stayed on the dock, a lone figure in the swirling fog, until the ship's lights disappeared into the mist and the vast darkness of the Black Sea. A weight he had been carrying for so long, the weight of rage and grief and fear, finally lifted from his soul. His body was still trapped in the chaos of his country, but his legacy was free. It was sailing away, a message in a bottle, carrying the echoes of the forgotten into the future. Lev's choice is a powerful one, isn't it? In a time defined by absolute certainty and brutal violence, he chose doubt. He chose empathy. He refused to accept the core lie that all tyrants tell, that some lives are worth more than others. Both Morozov and Orlov believed they were instruments of history, forging a new world through necessary, if regrettable, violence. They thought their legacy would be the new systems they built. But systems crumble. Ideologies fade. What Lev created was something far more permanent. He built a monument not of stone or steel, but of memory and truth. He ensured that the victims, all the victims, would not be faceless statistics in someone else's war. He gave them back their names, their faces, their stories. His revenge wasn't about settling a score with Orlov or Morozov. It was about defeating the very idea that they represented, the idea that a person can be erased. By creating the Book of Echoes, he achieved a form of justice that no firing squad or assassin's bomb ever could. He ensured that the truth would outlive the lie. He created a legacy, not of destruction, but of profound and defiant creation. It leaves us with a difficult question. When faced with the ugliness of the world, when you see injustice and cruelty, what is the right response? Is it to meet force with force, to adopt the enemy's tools in the hope of defeating them? Or is it to do what Lev did? To choose the slower, harder, quieter path of bearing witness, of creating, of preserving the very humanity that is under attack? What would you have done in his place? Let me know in the comments below. Your stories and your perspectives are what make this community so vital. Thank you for joining me on Revenge Pains. I'm Serena.